Wonderful to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today.
Great. It's wonderful to meet you as well.
So let's begin our journey into your work and your life by asking you this. 5 years ago, we were really wrapping our heads around the pandemic. There were so many unknowns, timeline, what it was going to do. So ultimately, now in 2025, how much of living through a pandemic has affected the way that you approach life today?
I would say it has had a huge impact on my life. And one of the main points of that would be right on the cusp of the pandemic beginning in 2020. I was scheduled to go to a wellness retreat
Yeah.
in Kings Beach, Tahoe, which that's that same place right there.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Yeah, yeah.
So I had this picture on my wall. I had this opportunity to physically go to the place. And then the pandemic hit, and I didn't know what to do. Do I still go to the retreat? What's going to happen? And what was a beautiful coincidence and the beginning of a journey was the host changed it to a virtual retreat.
Oh,
And I had never Zoomed before. I didn't even have a camera. So I participated in the retreat just by text. And it was a 3 day online retreat. And then I bought a webcam and I started doing online events. So the pandemic really changed my behavior in terms of expanding possibilities through Zoom, like this call that we're
yeah,
having right now. It's
absolutely.
fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into your work as a cognitive architect and to get to exactly what you do on a daily basis. The best way to do it is to put you in front of kids, 12-year-olds, career day. The kid in the back of the room wants to know what you're doing for a living. How do you answer them?
I would say that I created 4 zones of communication, and that's for talking outwardly. And it's also 4 zones of being for what's going on inside. And what I do is I help people figure out which zone they're in. For example, the pink zone is a place of comfort. Let's say sitting in the grass on a sunny day. And the yellow zone is more of an argument.
Yeah,
Let's say one person wants to go to the beach and another person wants to go to the park. So there's a little bit of that disconnect.
yeah,
And then the higher zone is the happiest place. It's like being at Disneyland where there's short lines on the rides. Everything just has that magical feeling.
yeah.
And then there's the halt zone. This is when things get a little complicated. Let's say it's time to leave Disneyland and I don't want to. And I have a bit of a tantrum and maybe stomp my feet a little bit because I don't want to leave. So that's the halt zone. And those are the 4 zones. And knowing which zone a person is in really helps them connect with themselves and the environment.
So how did you come up with these zones?
Oh gosh, it's been an adventure.
Yeah,
And what's neat is they've slowly come to me. The very first came together, and that was the pink and the yellow.
yeah,
And how it happened was I was drawing a Venn diagram of one person's perspective in a circle, and my perspective in a circle, and then where those circles intermingled, that middle part. And I highlighted with a highlighter yellow my individual views on reality, the other person's individual views on reality, and then that middle part was the pink zone. I highlighted that pink. That's where a shared understanding is, where two people don't necessarily have to agree, but they understand the foundation of reality for the other person.
so let me ask you this. When you were 12 years old, what was your dream? What did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a veterinary person. I
Okay.
love animals, and that also kind of ties in with the zones. Is I'm neurodivergent. I struggled in school. I stayed back in second grade. I was put in special classes, all because I learned and interpreted reality in a different way,
Yeah,
where I could feel if I was talking to someone and we were in the yellow zone, that there was a disconnect. But
yeah.
it's weird to stop and say, "Hey, what are you saying? I don't understand." And but animals, I didn't have to do that.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. So, how did we get to this point? Take me back to where you were born and raised, and how did you develop this, the zones and this cognitive ability, and how did this become your focal point in your career?
So, I had a career and I had friends and my family around, and I thought, I did it. I worked Friday through Saturday. I was confident in my career and I enjoyed it. But then I had a near-death experience,
Yeah.
and that completely changed my life to where after that, it was weird. It was like I was being called to go somewhere. I was being called to leave San Jose, where I was born and raised, to go to Seattle, Washington. And I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any ties. There was nothing, logically to bring me there. It was all intuition. And so I left everything and moved to Seattle. And then, kind of another strange thing, I wanted to go to real college, and Washington State University called to me. I have map blindness where geographical locations do weird things in my mind. And I thought Pullman was near Canada. And I thought, okay, I want to go there. But come to find out, it's in Eastern Washington in like farm country, nowhere near Canada.
Yeah.
But I went there. And that's really where my journey with the zones began, was when I was talking about that Venn diagram earlier. The specific example was with a university professor at WSU, where I questioned my education. I said, why am I being taught this? And the professor said, I didn't have a right to question her, that I'm just supposed to mark A, B, C, D, fill out my blue sheet, and that was another experience that changed me. I believe it's our duty as students to question what we're being taught and to apply critical thought to all aspects of life.
So, talk to me a little bit about those that have inspired you. Who's been kind of an inspiration or a hero for you to become who you are?
One of the main beginning ones is Amit Goswami.
Okay.
He's a quantum physicist. Have you heard of him?
I haven't. No.
Oh, he's amazing. And I've seen him in person quite a
Yeah.
few times. And when I was around him, he's so humble and so intelligent. I could channel his energy. He would talk about very complicated quantum physics instances, and I would understand them because it's so hard to describe in words, but he was so open.
Yeah.
And that made a huge impact to me to show me that's possible, that I can be open, another person can be open, and I can have dramatic quantum leaps of knowledge.
That's awesome. So, talk to me a little bit about, my son's on the spectrum. He's neurodivergent. So I understand that, that emotional intelligence quotient of how you can understand things in a very deep way that's different from other people. And I think that's the weird thing about calling it the special needs community, is that this inherent idea that there's a disability. And sure, there's an operation, they operate on a very different level than everybody else, but there's still this level of being more intuitive. Do you feel like you've developed kind of a more intuitive way of digging in to emotions and communication patterns that are a little bit atypical but are very deep in other ways?
Yes. And you brought up from some really great points about how society is changing, where before it was special needs, now it's more neurodivergency, and there's a spectrum of how that is and the different ways that, people like me and your son view the world. And I am so glad that the conversation is starting
Yeah.
and beginning, because that did change me. And that's one of the reasons why I developed the zones, so I could communicate that. I
Yeah.
say if I'm, dating someone or a family member, I'm in the halt zone right now. I need to be alone. I need to cry. I need to figure this out. Or, hey, we're in the pink zone. This is amazing. Let's keep this conversation going. So I use those zones to clarify what's going on the inside because I think that's a challenge for people with neurodivergence. And I know for me is I have a challenge expressing what's on the inside and then someone having that understanding what I'm saying and then us getting in the pink zone.
What I realize when I'm with my son, his name is Miles, is that people have this level of empathy or understanding when when they start talking to him, they immediately understand what's going on, and there's a level of them that kind of reaches harder. Do you find that people generally are really good about pivoting and being kind and being understanding and going down that route?
I would say it's a whole spectrum with that. And I think of one instance where I met someone and I talked to him and he says, um, y you've had a major head injury, haven't you? And I was like, whoa. But
Right.
he meant it in such a loving and compassionate way. And
Yeah.
it like as you're saying, he could tell I was different and he said something. He clarified that and that helps me is when there's that openness where somebody as you're saying kind of puts things on hold a minute and recognizes that I communicate a little differently
Yeah.
and another really great one, my neighbor knows I'm a little bit of a hermit, kind of
Yeah.
weird, and he just came up to me and said, "If you ever need anything, let me know. I'm
Nice.
always here for you."
Yeah.
And that like oh my gosh, I started to tear up
Yeah.
because that's such a simple phrase. And he didn't have to go into depth to say that, he knows I'm a little different. Just if I need help, he's there. So I've seen some magnificent beauty in
Yeah.
people and how they approach me.
Yeah, I have too. I've noticed that quite a bit. And you know, there's a podcast out there called the Telepathy Tapes, and this is the amazing thing about where we're at as humans. Maybe it's our evolutionary line. There is a group of autistic kids that are nonverbal that can read minds, and they've proved it.
Yes.
So they've done these tests where the parents are in the other room and they're in another room and they'll like bring things up, and it's like scientifically proven that these kids are reading minds. Like they can't really give them gifts for Christmas and birthdays because the kids know, and they can't be like, at the end of the day they want to finish the parent wants to finish the bag of chips and they're like, "Oh no, we'll get another bag later. We don't have any left." And the kids know because they can read their mind. So it's amazing how these kind of abilities have accumulated. Like for instance, there's a piano player. He's blind. His name is Matthew Whitaker, and he's a wonderful musician. And the way that he channels his energy and plays, I've seen him live. It's unbelievable, and it's as though because he can't see, there's all of these other sensory parts of him that have just awakened and become much sharper because of that. So I guess my point is the neurodivergent community has to work extra hard. I know with Miles to like overcome and do simple things that other people just do by rote. And it's almost as though the ability level gets risen up. The powers of perception and emotional intelligence and things like that. Do you find that to be the case?
Yes, very much. And to tie that into Amit Goswami, he described that as non-local communication, that the telepathy you're speaking of. There's local communication, which is signaled communication, and that's what we're doing right now. It can be
Yeah.
recorded, it can be seen in waves. Non-local communication is faster than the speed of light, and it's much harder to trace and to understand. That's where the quantum physics goes in. As we evolve as a species, we're able to quantify and measure more difficult things, such as non-local communication.
Yeah.
And that is a challenge for me. Sometimes I'll be out somewhere and it's strange. And I'll think of an example from the other day. I was on a run and I got this feeling. I was like, oh, a car is going to come around the corner. I need to smile and wave. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. And I go, the car comes around the corner. I give a big smile and a wave, and the person has a huge smile and a big wave.
Nice.
And I feel like they probably just needed that,
Yep.
and it's a part of that non-local communication and that deep level of empathy and interpreting the world differently in a non-linear way.
Yeah.
I think that's another key component is that time and space are measured differently here on Earth than in other realms,
Right.
other thoughts of thinking.
Absolutely. I was a communications major in college because I was getting into broadcasting. I mean, they didn't have a broadcasting school where I went. So I remember really studying the process of communicating as human beings. And I remember when I realized that over 70 to 80% of our communication is nonverbal. And then I think about Miles and I think about the neurodivergent community where a lot of a lot of people that have issues communicating verbally can hone in probably stronger on nonverbals and understand, which is why emotional quotient of that community can understand people, you know. But you know what I'm saying?
Yes. And I just a thought popped in my head.
Yeah,
One kind of practical tip for me to kind of calm the noise and as you're saying, verbally communicating is such a small piece of it, but
yeah,
it has so much weight. It's weighed like cannonballs as opposed to some of the non-local, non-verbal things are more like feathers.
yeah.
I often, a couple times a year, need to go on a silent retreat where I just stay in the house. I don't answer the phone. I don't talk over Zoom. I don't use my voice at all for at least 3 days. And that really helps me ground into myself. It's it's like I see all these things connected to me.
Yeah.
When I do my silent retreat, I'm freed of all that, and then I'm refreshed.
There's a phenomenon in music called color synesthesia, I believe, where you see colors, music is colors. And that I was just thinking about that, how that kind of extrasensory perception can develop in the human mind. Um, and I specifically heard about it from a man that was blind, who was actually, I believe, in Seattle. He's a flute and a saxophone player, highly intelligent, but he sees things in color, music and color, which is fascinating. So let me ask you this: in your work, what gets you up every day? What is the motivator for you to get up to do this work and to help people? What is that ultimate motivation?
It is conversations like what we're having today
Yeah,
is that we're talking about how there's past paradigms and they're growing and evolving. More people are aware of neurodivergence. I created those 4 zones so I could communicate better. I feel like I've I've had a lot of challenges in my life. And if I can help other people minimize their challenges and also have a deeper understanding of themselves as an individual and others as an individual, that's what gets me up in the morning is to be a part of this paradigm shift.
so let me ask you this: of everything that you've done, accomplished, and evolved into at this point in your life, what are you the proudest of?
Um, I'm gonna have to say the reflection writing streak I'm on right now. I
Yeah,
reflection write every day and I save a new document for each day. I have this whole meticulous process, and my goal was 1,011 days, and I beat that, and I'm still going.
nice.
So I've been reflection writing every single day for over 3 years,
Wow.
and it's been through challenges. And I still sit down at the computer and I introspect. I give myself that 15 minutes or 4 hours of time to figure out who I am and where am I and what's going on. So I'm still doing it. I don't know, when or how it's going to end, but I do my best to keep the streak and to recognize how important introspection and reflection writing have been on my journey.
So, Lynn, if you had a dream tonight, you ran into the 18-year-old version of you, and you could give that young version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've lived, the wisdom you've accumulated, what advice would you impart on that young version of you?
Oh gosh, I would give them the 4 zones
Yeah,
because that's one of the things I had trouble with, especially as a teenager, was the halt zone, was that extreme emotion, was that feeling that I was so alone, and I just like I wasn't human. Being neurodivergent back then, it was very complicated. And as it is now, but I would tell myself to recognize those zones and that they're temporary. That's the big part, is that the highs and the lows come and go. And sometimes for me, and especially as a youth, I was depressed. And I felt like that depression was going to last forever, and it didn't. And I would tell myself that life comes in waves, and to ride the waves best I can.
So, as you mentioned before, there's a hope that you have that we're having certain conversations about the neurodivergent community. How hopeful are you as we move forward that this will expand and get deeper? What's your ultimate hope for an outcome?
I am incredibly hopeful, and I have seen it, especially in the kind of Gen X generation with their children and millennials, that there's a really deep level of compassion that I think was absent in past paradigms of parenting, where as you're saying, you want what's best for Miles, and you're aware that he's different, and that's okay. And parents are having that mindset. And the whole shift I feel going right now is where people are a lot more compassionate towards individuality. That's what I think is a beautiful rainbow I see in the future, is compassion towards individuality.
That's great. So let me ask you this. Everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, everyone that knows you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Oh gosh, I would say, yeah, when I'm in which zone, which day, I
Yeah,
am like a leaf in the wind. I guess that would be the best way to describe me, is I'm constantly changing, constantly evolving, and I do my best to kind of roll with the reality that I'm in at the moment.
so if anyone wants to reach out, they have any questions, they want to hire you, any of the good business, where's the best place to go?
That would be my website, and it's ZOALQ.com. That's for Zones of Atlas, Lynn Quinn. Um, my other address was 4Z Communication, and every time I send an email, I have to type that out. So I picked the shorter
Yeah, yeah, I get it.
web address. So I'm learning too.
Yeah,
And that's a big part of cognitive architecture, is trial and error, figuring out what works, what doesn't work. And that's what I do with speakers, is I help them speak in the pink zone. So that's the zone of shared understanding. It's that zone, as I was talking about, the compassion towards individuality,
yeah.
where as much of speech comes from a subconscious process, paradigms of the past, stereotypes, the words just, come out like a wheel. What I do is to help lift those subconscious word processes to conscious word processes.
Wonderful. Lynn, this has been great. I'm going to put all of this in the show notes to make sure that everybody comes your way. Thank you for your story. Thank you for opening up. It's wonderful. It's very hopeful. So I appreciate it. Best of luck with everything.
Oh, thank you. And you too, Joe. I'm having a wonderful time.
It was wonderful. Thank you. Hey.
Hello, friends. Joe Dimino here. I just wanted to let you know that after 30 years or so, I have finally released my first book of poetry through the mighty Spartan Press here in Kansas City, Missouri. As the creator and host of both Neon Jazz Radio and the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino podcast, along with being a visual artist, I'm ready to embark on a new adventure and want you to be a part of it. You can get a copy online via Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and actually on the streets in Kansas City at the great Prospero's bookstore off 39th Street. You can also visit joedimino.com for links to the book, to more poetry, and everything in my world, including paintings. Thanks for all of the love and support over the years, and please dig the words.